Blue flashing lights painted our living room walls, reflecting off the very lake we moved here to enjoy in peace. My wife, Skylar, stood in her gardening apron, holding a simple brass padlock, while a 50-something woman in a tennis skirt screamed into a phone that she was being held hostage. We just wanted a quiet weekend retreat. Instead, a $10 hardware store lock ignited a war that dismantled an entire homeowners association and ended in handcuffs. Here is our story. It took Skylar and me 4 years of saving, skipping vacations, and eating homemade pasta to finally afford the down payment on our dream getaway. We lived in the bustling heart of Chicago, where the constant drone of traffic and sirens had slowly started chipping away at our sanity. Skylar is an ER nurse, a woman who spends 12 hours a day dealing with the absolute most chaotic moments of people's lives. I work as a senior software architect, my days consumed by endless screens of code and aggressive corporate deadlines. We needed an escape. We needed trees, water, and silence. When our real estate agent, Jessica Barnes, showed us the listing at Cedar Lake Shores in Wisconsin, we fell in love immediately. It was a beautiful, slightly weathered 1980s A-frame cabin with deep cedar siding, a wraparound deck, and a sloping wooded backyard that led straight down to the water. The property line was completely fenced in on the sides, featuring a beautiful, albeit slightly rusted, wrought iron gate at the bottom of the yard. That gate opened onto a small, private dock. It was perfect. We closed on the house in early May, right before the summer rush, blissfully unaware of the dark underbelly of the Cedar Lake Shores Homeowners Association. Our first weekend moving in was pure magic. We unpacked boxes, drank cheap champagne on the porch, and listened to the loons calling across the water. But the illusion of paradise shattered on our third morning. I was sitting on the back deck with my coffee, watching the sunrise over the mist-covered lake, when I heard the distinct creak-clank of metal. I leaned over the railing and spotted a woman strutting right through our backyard. She was in her early 50s, wearing a pristine white tennis skirt, a pink sun visor, and oversized sunglasses. Trailing behind her, off-leash, was a hyperactive golden doodle that was currently trampling Skylar's newly planted hydrangeas. She marched up the stone path from our private gate, swinging a woven beach tote, looking around critically as if she were inspecting a hotel room. "Excuse me," I called out, setting my mug down. "Can I help you?" The woman stopped, shielded her eyes from the sun, and looked up at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you must be the new buyers. I'm Brenda Romero. I'm the president of the Cedar Lake Shores Homeowners Association." I walked down the wooden stairs to meet her, forcing a polite smile. "Hi, Brenda. I'm Daryl Henderson. My wife Skylar and I just moved in. Nice to meet you. I didn't realize the HOA did welcome visits so early." "Well, I like to run a tight ship," Brenda said, her eyes darting to the side of the house where a few flattened moving boxes were stacked. "We have strict guidelines about refuse visibility, Daryl. Those boxes need to be out of sight by 8 a.m. But I'll let it slide today since you're new." I blinked, slightly taken aback by the immediate reprimand. "Right. Thanks. Do you mind if I ask why you're walking through our backyard?" Brenda let out a high-pitched, condescending laugh. "Hey, oh, sweetheart. The previous owner, Mr. Higgins, always let me use the gate. My house is just 2 doors down on the cul-de-sac, but my lot doesn't have direct water access. The path through your yard is the quickest way to the community beach area." I frowned, looking back at the gate. "But this is private property. The property line extends all the way down to the water. Our deed includes the dock and the gate." "Well, legally, maybe." Brenda waved her manicured hand dismissively. But in Cedar Lake, we operate on community spirit. It's an unwritten rule, an easement of goodwill, if you will. I've been using this path for 6 years, and I'm certainly not going to start walking the extra half-mile around the main road now." Before I could fully process the sheer audacity of her statement, her dog squatted right in the middle of our stone pathway and left a massive pile of droppings. "Hey," I stepped forward. "Your dog just... Oh, Barnaby's just leaving a little welcome gift." Brenda cooed, completely ignoring the mess. She didn't reach for a bag. She didn't even look apologetic. Anyway, welcome to the neighborhood, Daryl. Make sure those boxes are gone. And you might want to consider power washing your deck. The wood is looking a bit non-compliant. With that, she whistled for Barnaby and sauntered up our driveway, leaving me standing in the morning dew, staring at dog feces on my property. When Skylar woke up an hour later, I recounted the entire bizarre interaction. Skylar, who deals with belligerent patients for a living, narrowed her eyes. She grabbed a plastic bag, cleaned up the mess, and marched straight over to Brenda's house. I followed, knowing my wife's temper. Skylar dropped the bagged waste right into Brenda's pristine, decorative mailbox, closed it with a sharp snap, and walked back without saying a word. The war had officially begun. Over the next 3 weeks, Brenda made it her personal mission to establish dominance. Despite my clear discomfort during our first meeting, she continued to use our yard as her personal highway. She would stroll through at 7 a.m., letting her dog run rampant. She would walk through at 4 p.m. with her friends, laughing loudly and leaving the heavy iron gate wide open, allowing local wildlife to wander into our yard. Once, I found a half-empty plastic cup of iced tea sitting on our patio table, a souvenir from one of her afternoon shortcuts. We tried the diplomatic route first. The following Saturday, when we saw her unlatching our gate, Skylar walked down to the yard to intercept her. "Brenda, hi," Skylar said, using her firm, professional nurse voice. "We need to talk about you using our property." Brenda stopped, her hand on her hip. "Skylar, isn't it? What seems to be the problem?" "The problem is that this is our private property," Skylar explained calmly. "You leave the gate open, your dog destroys our plants, and frankly, we bought this place for privacy. We have to ask you to stop using our yard as a shortcut. The public access path is only a 5-minute drive away." Brenda's fake smile vanished. Her face hardened into a mask of pure indignation. "I am the HOA president. I have overseen this community for a decade. Mr. Higgins never had an issue with me walking through here. It is an established community pathway." "Mr. Higgins doesn't own this house anymore. We do," Skylar replied, standing her ground. "And we are asking you to respect our boundaries." Brenda scoffed, looking Skylar up and down with utter disdain. "You city people come in here thinking you can disrupt our way of life. There are rules here, Skylar, unwritten covenants of neighborly conduct. If you want to play hardball, you'll find that the HOA has a lot of power over what you can and cannot do with your little cabin." "Are you threatening us over a shortcut?" I asked, stepping up beside my wife. "I'm educating you," Brenda sneered. "Have a nice day, and fix your lawn edge. It's overgrown by at least half an inch. Expect a notice." She turned and marched out the gate, leaving it wide open behind her. True to her word, Brenda weaponized the HOA immediately. We returned to Chicago for the work week, only to come back to the cabin the following Friday, to find 3 envelopes taped to our front door. They were official notices from the Cedar Lake Shores Homeowners Association, printed on heavy stock paper and signed by Brenda Romero. The first was a $50 fine for improper refuse storage, the moving boxes which we had actually moved into the garage before leaving. The second was a $75 fine for lawn maintenance violation, the allegedly overgrown edge. The third, and most ridiculous, was a formal warning for hostile behavior towards community leadership, citing our conversation in the yard. Skylar was furious. She spent Friday night reading the entire 200-page CCR, Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions document we had received at closing. She sat at the kitchen island, a highlighter in one hand and a glass of red wine in the other, combing through every single clause. "Listen to this, Daryl," she said at 11:30 p.m., slapping the thick stack of papers. Section 4, Paragraph B. The HOA Board may issue fines for clear violations of property maintenance, provided a written warning is issued with a 14-day cure period. She didn't give us a warning, she just fined us immediately. I leaned over her shoulder. "What about the gate? Is there anything about an easement?" Skylar flipped to the back of the binder. I checked the plat map, and the property lines. There is absolutely no public or community easement on our land. The only easements are for utility lines near the front road. The gate, the path, and the dock are 100% our private, exclusive property. Her unwritten rules mean absolutely nothing legally. So she's just making it up, I said, shaking my head. She's using her title to bully us into giving her beachfront access. Exactly, Skylar said, her eyes flashing with determination. And I am not paying a dime of these fake fines. More importantly, I am done letting her treat our yard like a public park. The next morning, we drove into town and visited the local hardware store. We bought a heavy-duty, weather-resistant master lock, the kind used for industrial shipping containers. We also bought a thick, steel-woven security chain and a pair of bolt cutters. When we got back to the cabin, we walked down to the gate. The old lock was a flimsy, rusted latch mechanism that didn't even require a key. You just lifted a metal bar. It was a relic from the 80s. I took the bolt cutters and snapped the old latch off completely. Then I wrapped the thick steel chain around the iron bany of the gate and the sturdy oak post next to it, securing it tightly with the new master lock. It was solid, unmovable. Unless Brenda was packing an angle grinder in her beach tote, she wasn't getting through. We spent the rest of the day enjoying our property in peace. We swam, we grilled burgers, and we actually managed to relax. But the peace was a temporary illusion. The quiet before a massive storm. On Sunday morning, the retaliation escalated. I walked out to get the newspaper from the end of the driveway and found that our mailbox had been stuffed with dog feces. Not bagged this time, just shoved inside, smeared all over the local paper and our utility bills. I felt my blood pressure skyrocket. I grabbed the hose, washed out the mailbox as best as I could, and stormed back inside. I didn't want to tell Skylar, knowing it would ruin her weekend before her grueling hospital shifts. But she saw my face when I walked into the kitchen. "What did she do?" Skylar asked immediately. I told her. Skylar didn't yell. She didn't throw anything. Instead, she went terrifyingly calm. She walked to her laptop, ordered 3 high-definition, solar-powered security cameras with motion tracking, and paid for overnight shipping to the cabin. "We are documenting everything," Skylar said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "If she wants a war over a gate, I will give her a war she will never forget." For the next 2 weeks, Brenda continued to harass us via mail. We received notices for the color of our exterior lights. They were too yellow. The type of bird feeder we had attracts non-native species, and the fact that our car was parked 2 inches over the driveway line. We ignored them all, meticulously filing them away in a folder Skylar labeled Brenda's bullshit. We installed the cameras the following weekend. One pointed directly at the mailbox, one covered the back deck, and the most important one was mounted on a tree aimed squarely at the iron gate. We connected them to our phones, ensuring we would get a notification the second anyone set foot on our land. We didn't have to wait long. It was the 4th of July weekend. The community was bustling. The lake was dotted with pontoon boats, and the smell of barbecue charcoal filled the air. Skylar and I had decided to spend the entire week at the cabin to truly unwind. I was inside at the kitchen table, finishing up a remote code deployment for work, while Skylar was out in the backyard, wearing her gardening apron, carefully pruning the rose bushes near the deck. At exactly 1:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the gate camera. I opened the app and watched the live feed. Coming up the path from the community beach area was Brenda. But she wasn't alone. She was flanked by 2 other women, both carrying heavy cooler bags, beach chairs, and an oversized umbrella. Trailing behind them were 3 rowdy teenagers and, of course, the off-leash dog, Barnaby. Brenda was wearing a brightly colored floral swimsuit cover-up and holding a massive tumbler of iced coffee. She marched up to our gate, chatting animatedly with her friends over her shoulder. She reached out, blindly grasping for the old, flimsy latch, while continuing her conversation. Her hand hit the heavy steel chain. On the camera feed, I watched Brenda stop dead in her tracks. She looked down at the industrial-grade lock. She pulled on the chain. It didn't budge. She rattled the gate with both hands, the heavy iron clanging loudly, but the chain held firm. "What's wrong, Brenda?" one of her friends asked. The gate is stuck," Brenda stammered, her face turning a distinct shade of crimson. She rattled it again, harder this time, her manicured nails scraping against the steel. I closed my laptop and walked out onto the back deck, leaning against the wooden railing. Skylar had already stopped pruning. She was standing on the lawn, shears in one hand, watching the spectacle unfold at the bottom of our property. "Excuse me," Brenda shrieked, spotting Skylar through the iron bars. Her voice echoed up the slope, sharp enough to cut glass. "Skylar, come down here and open this immediately." Skylar didn't rush. She calmly set her pruning shears down on a wooden bench, wiped her hands on her apron, and slowly walked down the stone path. I followed a few paces behind, pulling out my phone and hitting the record button. I wanted a backup to the security cameras. "Hello, Brenda," Skylar said evenly as we reached the gate. "Is there a problem?" "You locked it," Brenda screamed, her face practically pressed against the iron bars. "You changed the lock on the community gate." "It's not a community gate, Brenda. It's our private gate. On our private property," Skylar replied, her voice steady. "We asked you repeatedly to stop using our yard as a shortcut. You refused, so we secured our property." Brenda's friends exchanged nervous glances. One of the teenagers shifted uncomfortably. "This is an illegal eviction," Brenda roared, her voice escalating to a hysterical pitch. "You are denying me access to my rightful easement. I am the HOA president, and I demand you take this chain off right now, or I will fine you $500 a day." "You can fine us whatever you want, Brenda. It's entirely unenforceable," I interjected, holding my phone up. "We've read the CCRs. There is no easement. You are trespassing." "I am not trespassing." Brenda lunged forward, grabbing the iron bars and shaking the gate violently. The heavy steel rattled loudly, but the chain held. "This is an outrage, you ungrateful, arrogant city snobs. Open this gate. I have guests. We are going to the beach. The public access path is a 5-minute drive that way." Skylar pointed calmly toward the road. "Have a nice walk." Skylar turned around to walk back up to the house. That was the moment Brenda completely lost her mind. "Don't you turn your back on me," Brenda shrieked. She reached into her woven beach tote and pulled out her cell phone. Her hands were shaking with rage. "You want to play games? Fine, I'm calling the police. You are stealing community property and physically threatening me." Skylar stopped and turned back around, a look of utter disbelief on her face. "Threatening you? I'm standing 10 feet away from you on my own land." Brenda didn't listen. She aggressively dialed 3 numbers and pressed the phone to her ear. I kept recording, capturing every second of her unhinged performance. "Hello? 911? Brenda's voice suddenly changed. The screeching rage vanished, replaced instantly by the trembling, tearful voice of a terrified victim. It was an Oscar-worthy transition. Yes, please send help immediately. I'm at the Henderson property at Cedar Lake Shores. Yes, the new residence. I'm being held against my will." I scoffed loudly. "Held against your will? You're on the outside of a locked gate." Brenda turned away from us, sobbing into the phone. "They have locked me out of my property access. The wife, Skylar, she's holding a weapon. She has sharp metal shears and she's threatening to attack me if I try to walk away. Please hurry. They are hostile and violent. I fear for my life." Her friends looked horrified, not by us, but by Brenda's blatant lies. "Brenda, what are you doing?" one of the women whispered, backing away slowly. "Let's just go around." "Shut up, Carol," Brenda hissed, covering the receiver before returning to her fake crying. "Please send officers now. They're trapping me here." She hung up the phone and glared at us through the bars, a triumphant, malicious smirk breaking through her fake tears. "You're done," she spat venomously. "You assault an HOA official, you go to jail. Let's see how smug you are when you're in handcuffs." Skylar looked at me, then back at Brenda. She didn't look scared. She looked like an ER nurse who had just been handed a chart for a patient faking a seizure. "Daryl," Skylar said calmly, picking up her pruning shears from the bench. "Go inside and print out the property deed, the plot map, and the HOA bylaws. Oh, and bring out a couple of bottles of water. If we're waiting for the police, we might as well stay hydrated." We sat on our back deck, sipping water, while Brenda paced furiously on the other side of the gate, trapped in a prison of her own making, waiting for the authorities to arrive. 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet lake air. 2 patrol cars came tearing down the community road, kicking up dust before slamming to a halt near the beach access path. The real show was about to begin. 2 heavy-set police officers came sprinting down the public access path, their heavy black boots crunching loudly against the gravel. The crackle of their shoulder radios cut through the idyllic sounds of splashing water and distant boat motors. Both officers had their hands resting cautiously on their holstered weapons. Given the frantic nature of Brenda's 911 call, they were fully expecting to walk into an active hostage situation involving a deranged, armed homeowner holding a prominent community figure captive. Instead, they found Skylar and me sitting comfortably on our wooden deck chairs, sipping bottled water, while Brenda gripped the outside of our iron gate, hyperventilating in an Oscar-worthy performance of pure terror. "Officers! Over here! Help me!" Brenda shrieked the absolute second she saw the uniforms. She began shaking the iron gate again, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "They trapped me. She's crazy. She's got a weapon." The lead officer, a tall, no-nonsense man, whose name tag read Callahan, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the scene. He looked at the heavy master lock on the gate, then up at Skylar and me, sitting 10 feet away, separated from Brenda by a solid iron barrier. "Everyone stay exactly where you are," Officer Callahan ordered, though the command felt a bit redundant given the geography of the situation. He pointed a finger at Skylar. "Ma'am, do you have a weapon on your person?" Skylar calmly stood up, keeping her hands perfectly visible. She didn't raise her voice, tapping into the same professional, de-escalating tone she used on combative patients in the ER. "No, officer. I have a pair of gardening shears sitting on the wooden bench to my left. I was pruning my rose bushes before this woman began trespassing and shaking our fence." Officer Callahan frowned, exchanging a bewildered look with his partner, Officer Reynolds. They walked down the slope until they were standing directly next to Brenda on the public side of the gate. "Ma'am," Officer Reynolds said, turning to Brenda, "are you injured? Can you explain how you are being held against your will if you are on the outside of a locked fence?" Brenda's fake tears instantly evaporated, replaced by the indignant fury of a woman unaccustomed to being questioned. "They locked the community gate," she sputtered, pointing a manicured finger through the bars at us. "This is an established HOA easement. They ambushed me, they trapped me on this side, and when I tried to walk away, that woman threatened me with those sharp shears. She told me if I moved, she would attack me." Carol and the other friend, a woman named Nancy, were standing several feet back, looking like they desperately wanted the earth to swallow them whole. The teenagers had already retreated halfway up the public path, burying their faces in their smartphones to escape the second-hand embarrassment. "Is this true?" Officer Callahan asked, looking up at us. "Officer, my name is Daryl Henderson, and this is my wife Skylar," I said, walking slowly down the steps with my hands empty, holding only my smartphone. "We purchased this property 2 months ago. There is no community easement. This is private property, straight down to the water. We locked our own gate to prevent this woman from constantly walking her off-leash dog through our yard. When she found it locked, she threw a temper tantrum and called 911. "That is a lie!" Brenda screamed, her face turning purple. "I am the president of the Cedar Lake Shores HOA. I know the bylaws. Arrest them for false imprisonment and assault." "Actually, officer, I don't need to argue with her," I said smoothly. I tapped the screen of my phone, pulled up the video I had just recorded, and handed it through the bars to Officer Callahan. I filmed the entire interaction, from the moment she found the lock to the moment she called 911. Brenda's face dropped. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking incredibly pale beneath her expensive sun visor. She hadn't realized I was recording. Officer Callahan took the phone. Officer Reynolds leaned in over his shoulder. For the next 3 minutes, the only sound was the faint splashing of the lake and the high-pitched, recorded screeching of Brenda Romero echoing from my phone's speaker. The officers watched her rattle the gate, threaten us with daily fines, and then immediately weaponize the police department by faking a hostage situation. When the video finished playing, Officer Callahan handed the phone back to me. His demeanor had completely changed. The tense, cautious posture of a cop responding to a violent crime vanished, replaced by the cold, hard glare of a law enforcement officer who had just been blatantly lied to. He turned slowly to Brenda. "Mrs. Romero," Officer Callahan said, his voice dangerously low. "Falsely reporting a violent crime and misusing the 911 emergency system are very serious offenses. We sped through a residential neighborhood with children playing because you claimed you were being held hostage by a woman with a deadly weapon. I felt threatened," Brenda stammered, stepping back, clutching her woven beach tote to her chest like a shield. "She had shears. You saw them on the bench." "I saw a woman gardening in her own backyard on video, standing 10 feet away from you," Officer Callahan corrected sharply. He turned to Brenda's friends who were now trying to subtly inch away toward the parking lot. "Ma'am, did the homeowner ever threaten Mrs. Romero with a weapon?" Carol swallowed hard, looking terrified. She looked at Brenda, then at the police officers. "No," Carol whispered, shaking her head. "Oh, no, Brenda just... She got mad the gate was locked. The new owners didn't do anything aggressive." "Traitor," Brenda hissed at Carol, her eyes bulging. "You are off the architectural committee, Carol. Do you hear me? You're done." "Mrs. Romero, that is enough," Officer Reynolds interrupted, stepping between Brenda and her friend. "You are trespassing on private property, and you have filed a false police report. I need you to hand over your identification." Brenda stared at the officer as if he had just spoken a foreign language. Her brain, completely hardwired by a decade of unchecked suburban dictatorship, simply could not process the fact that she was the one in trouble. "My identification?" Brenda repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you know who I am? I run this community. I pay the taxes that fund your salary. You are going to arrest these squatters for restricting my access, or I will have your badges by tomorrow morning." It was, without a doubt, the worst possible thing she could have said. Officer Callahan let out a heavy, tired sigh. He reached back and unclipped the leather strap securing his handcuffs. "Brenda Romero," Officer Callahan said, stepping toward her. "You are under arrest for the misuse of the 911 system and filing a false police report. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The lake went completely silent. Even Barnaby, the hyperactive golden doodle, stopped panting and sat down in the dirt. Skylar and I stood on our side of the fence, utterly speechless, watching a masterclass in karma unfold. "No!" Brenda shrieked, backing away from the officer. "No, you can't do this. I have HOA immunity. This is a civil matter." "HOA immunity does not exist, ma'am," Officer Reynolds said dryly, moving to flank her. "Turn around." Instead of complying, Brenda made a wildly irrational decision. As Officer Callahan reached out to grasp her wrist, Brenda swung her heavy, woven beach tote directly at his head. The bag, which was apparently loaded with a heavy insulated thermos and several bottles of sunscreen, struck the officer squarely in the shoulder with a loud thud. "Hey!" Officer Reynolds shouted. In a matter of seconds, the two officers grabbed Brenda by the arms, spun her around, and pressed her firmly against the very iron gate she had been demanding we open. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting around her wrists echoed loudly across the yard. "Get your hands off me. I am the president. I am the president," Brenda wailed, kicking her white tennis shoes frantically against the dirt. Her oversized sunglasses fell off her face, getting crushed under Officer Callahan's boot. "You are now also being charged with assaulting a police officer and resisting arrest," Officer Callahan stated calmly as he secured the cuffs. He began reciting her Miranda rights as they marched her away from the gate, up the public path, and toward the waiting squad cars. By this time, the commotion had drawn an audience. Neighbors from the surrounding cabins had wandered out onto their docks and decks. Pontoon boats had slowed to a crawl in the water behind our house, the occupants watching with rapt attention as the tyrannical dictator of Cedar Lake Shores was paraded past them in handcuffs, her floral swimsuit cover-up flapping in the breeze. Carol and Nancy hastily gathered their beach gear, grabbed the dog's leash, and practically ran in the opposite direction, abandoning their fearless leader entirely. Skylar looked at me, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her face. "Well," she said, picking up her gardening shears, "I guess she won't be using the shortcut anymore. We thought Brenda's arrest was the climax of the drama. We thought she would post bail, hire a fancy lawyer, and spend the next few years glaring at us from across the street while we lived in a state of tense, cold war. We were wrong. The arrest was merely the thread that unraveled Brenda's entire criminal tapestry. The immediate fallout was spectacular. The news of Brenda's arrest spread through the Cedar Lake Shores community faster than a wildfire. By Monday morning, our inbox was flooded with emails from neighbors we hadn't even met yet, thanking us for finally standing up to the neighborhood bully. But the real twist came 2 weeks later. With Brenda legally barred from contacting us as a condition of her bail, the HOA board was forced to hold an emergency meeting to address her absence and the sudden power vacuum. A man named Thomas Jenkins, the vice president who had basically been a silent rubber stamp for Brenda's decrees, stepped in as interim president. Skylar and I attended the meeting, which was held in the local community center. It was packed, standing room only. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of outrage and celebration. Thomas Jenkins stood at the front of the room, looking visibly pale and sweating profusely. He adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas said nervously. "As you know, Mrs. Romero is currently facing legal difficulties. In her absence, the board has conducted a preliminary review of the association's administrative files and financial accounts to ensure a smooth transition." A hush fell over the room. "During this review," Thomas continued, his voice shaking slightly, "we discovered several irregularities. It turned out that Brenda wasn't just a power-hungry micromanager. She was a brazen embezzler. For the past 6 years, Brenda had been using her position as HOA president to drain the community reserve funds. She had established a shell company called Romero Greenery Solutions and had been billing the HOA thousands of dollars a month for community landscaping and path maintenance. The twist? The community path she was charging the neighborhood to maintain was actually our private property, the path through Mr. Higgins's yard. Because Mr. Higgins was elderly and rarely visited the cabin in his final years, Brenda had convinced the board that his yard was a community easement that required expensive, specialized upkeep. She was writing checks from the HOA directly into her own bank account to mow a lawn she didn't own. When we bought the house and locked the gate, we didn't just inconvenience her beach trip, we threatened to expose her entire fraudulent operation. If the path was undeniably proven to be private property with no easement, the board would eventually ask why they were paying Romero Greenery Solutions to maintain it. Her desperate 911 call wasn't just about a locked gate. It was the panic of a cornered criminal watching her cash cow evaporate. The murmurs in the community center erupted into full-blown shouts. Residents who had been fined for leaving their trash cans out 3 minutes too long were realizing their penalty money had funded Brenda's luxury vacations. "We have handed all financial records over to the local district attorney's office," Thomas Jenkins announced over the screaming crowd. "The HOA board is officially filing civil litigation against Mrs. Romero for fraud and theft of community funds." Skylar reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with shock. We had just wanted a peaceful weekend cabin. Instead, we had inadvertently taken down a suburban crime syndicate with a $10 master lock. The revelation at the community center was the equivalent of dropping a lit match into a powder keg. Over the next few weeks, Cedar Lake Shores transformed from a quiet weekend retreat into an active crime scene investigation. The local district attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor named Arthur Penhaligon, took a personal interest in the case. Embezzlement within homeowner associations was notoriously difficult to prosecute because the paper trails were often messy and convoluted. But Brenda Romero was not a criminal mastermind. She was an arrogant suburban dictator who believed her own title made her invincible. A week after the explosive HOA meeting, Skylar and I received subpoenas to appear at the district attorney's office. Our little property dispute had officially become the linchpin in a massive felony fraud case. We sat in a sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room across from ADA Penhaligon and a forensic accountant named Greg. Greg looked like a man who hadn't slept since the Bush administration, surrounded by towering stacks of financial ledgers, bank statements, and printed emails. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, thank you for coming in," Penhaligon said, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. "I want to show you something, but I need you to understand that this is part of an ongoing criminal investigation. Your property, specifically the gate and the path, is central to the state's case." Skylar opened the folder. Inside were dozens of invoices, all stamped with the letterhead of Romero Greenery Solutions. "Take a look at the dates and the descriptions," Penhaligon instructed. I leaned over to read them with Skylar. The invoices were staggering. Every single month for the last 6 years, the HOA had cut a check ranging from $2,500 to $4,000 for erosion control and pathway maintenance on Lot 42. Lot 42 was our property. The invoices detailed elaborate services: soil stabilization, exotic weed removal, custom gravel imported from out of state, and specialized ironwork maintenance for the gate. She was billing the neighborhood $4,000 a month to maintain a path that consisted of dirt, a rusted gate, and overgrown crabgrass, I asked, utterly bewildered. We didn't even have gravel. It was just mud and stepping stones. Exactly, Greg, the accountant, chimed in, adjusting his glasses. The funds were deposited into a business account registered to a P.O. box in the next county. From there, the money was funneled directly into Brenda Romero's personal checking account. We've tracked the expenditures. HOA funds paid for her country club membership, 2 luxury cruises to the Mediterranean, extensive renovations to her primary residence, and, ironically, the purebred golden doodle you mentioned in your initial police report. Skylar let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She bought Barnaby with our HOA dues. Barnaby, his premium organic dog food, and his weekly grooming sessions, Penhaligon confirmed without a trace of a smile. But the fraud required the illusion of an active community project. She convinced the previous owner, Mr. Higgins, that the HOA would maintain his waterfront in exchange for her walking her dog there. Because Mr. Higgins was in declining health and largely absent, he never saw the state of the yard, nor did he realize the sheer amount of money she was claiming to spend on it. When he passed away and the house went on the market, she panicked. The pieces all clicked together with sickening clarity. Brenda's obsession with our yard wasn't just about convenience, it was about protecting her alibi. If we shut down the path, the HOA board, even one as checked out as hers, would eventually ask why they were still paying Romero Greenery Solutions for a locked private yard. "She needed you to capitulate," Penhaligon explained. "She needed you to accept the unwritten easement so the billing could continue uninterrupted. When you put that master lock on the gate, you effectively cut off her primary source of stolen income. Her 911 call was a desperate, irrational attempt to use law enforcement to force the gate open and reestablish her alibi." "So what happens now?" Skylar asked, crossing her arms. "She's facing false police report charges, but this is grand larceny." "It's wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand theft," Penhaligon corrected. "We estimate she has siphoned just over $250,000 from the Cedar Lake Shores reserve funds over the last 6 years. We are preparing a grand jury indictment, but Mrs. Romero is not going down quietly." That turned out to be the understatement of the year. Brenda, out on bail and stripped of her HOA presidency, was rapidly spiraling. Instead of hiring a competent defense attorney and negotiating a plea deal, she doubled down on her delusion. She hired a flashy, aggressive civil litigator from Chicago and launched a desperate counteroffensive. 2 days after our meeting with the DA, a process server showed up at our cabin and handed me a thick stack of legal documents. Brenda was suing us. She was suing Skylar and me for tortious interference with a business contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation. Her lawsuit claimed that we had illegally trapped her, caused her severe psychological trauma, and intentionally destroyed her landscaping business by locking our gate. It was a SLAP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed purely to intimidate us and drain our finances so we would drop our cooperation with the DEA. Skylar, my brilliant, unflappable wife, did not panic. She sat at the kitchen island, poured a cup of coffee, and read through the lawsuit with a critical eye. Then she picked up her phone and called her brother, a corporate defense attorney in Manhattan, known for being absolutely ruthless. "She wants to play the litigation game," Skylar said to me, hanging up the phone with a predatory grin. "We're going to countersue for trespassing, harassment, and property damage, and we are going to subpoena every single electronic device in her house for discovery." The legal battle became the talk of the county. Brenda's lawyer aggressively tried to depose us, hoping to catch us in a contradiction. During the deposition, Brenda sat across the conference table, glaring daggers at us, looking drastically different from the pristine woman in the tennis skirt. The stress of the criminal investigation and the community backlash had aged her 10 years. Her lawyer practically shouted at Skylar, "Mrs. Henderson, isn't it true that you locked the gate with the express intent of causing Mrs. Romero public humiliation?" Skylar stared the lawyer down with the cold, dead-eyed professionalism of a nurse who routinely handles intoxicated patients at 3 a.m. "I locked the gate to prevent a trespasser's dog from defecating on my hydrangeas." The fact that the trespasser then staged a hostage crisis and unraveled her own criminal enterprise is entirely her own fault. Brenda's lawyer had no response. Brenda herself looked like she was going to explode. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. As part of our civil countersuit, my brother-in-law filed a motion for expedited discovery regarding Brenda's business communications. Faced with the reality of having to turn over her personal hard drives, which would undoubtedly contain even more evidence of her fraud, Brenda's civil lawyer abruptly dropped her as a client. Without legal representation in the civil arena, and with the criminal indictment officially coming down from the grand jury, Brenda's fortress of entitlement completely collapsed. The criminal trial of Brenda Romero took place in mid-October. The air around Cedar Lake had turned crisp, the leaves shifting into vibrant shades of orange and gold. The summer crowds were gone, but the county courthouse was absolutely packed. It felt like every single property owner from Cedar Lake Shores had taken the day off work to witness the fall of the tyrant. Brenda's criminal defense attorney, a weary-looking public defender she was forced to use after her assets were frozen by the state, had desperately pushed for a plea deal. The DA offered her 3 years in state prison. Brenda, clinging to her delusions of grandeur until the very end, rejected the plea. She genuinely believed she could convince a jury that the neighborhood owed her the money for her tireless leadership. The trial lasted 4 days. It was a massacre. Ada Penhaligon systematically dismantled Brenda's life. He played the 911 tape, projecting my cell phone video of her standing safely on the outside of the locked gate right next to it. He brought up Greg the accountant, who walked the jury through the staggering Romero Greenery Solutions invoices, contrasting them with photos of our muddy, overgrown yard. Then came the character witnesses. Thomas Jenkins, the interim HOA president, testified about Brenda's dictatorial reign, how she intimidated board members and forged signatures on bank authorizations. Carol and Nancy, her former beach-going friends, reluctantly took the stand and admitted under oath that Brenda had never been threatened by Skylar. and that Brenda frequently bragged about how she could use HOA funds for whatever she wanted. Brenda did not testify, a rare moment of good legal advice she actually followed. But her face during the proceedings told the whole story. She sat at the defense table, her posture rigid, her face locked in a permanent scowl of victimhood, shaking her head aggressively every time someone spoke against her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman read the verdict, the courtroom was dead silent. On the charge of misuse of the 911 emergency system, guilty. On the charge of filing a false police report, guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. On the charge of grand larceny, guilty. A collective gasp of relief swept through the gallery. Several residents actually hugged each other. Brenda slumped back in her chair, the fight finally draining out of her, replaced by genuine, unscripted shock. Sentencing took place a month later before Judge William Peterson, a stern man with zero tolerance for white-collar crime. "Mrs. Romero," Judge Peterson said, looking down at her from the bench. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such brazen entitlement. You weaponized emergency services, you attempted to frame an innocent couple for a violent felony, and you systematically robbed your own neighbors to fund a lifestyle of luxury. You viewed your community not as a group of peers to serve, but as a kingdom to plunder." He sentenced Brenda to 5 years in a minimum security state correctional facility, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Furthermore, he ordered full restitution of the $250,000 stolen from the HOA. Because Brenda's assets had been frozen, her beautiful, pristine house 2 doors down from our cabin was seized and sold at auction to help pay back the community. Barnaby the golden doodle was surrendered and happily adopted by Thomas Jenkins, who immediately put the dog on a diet and trained him to walk on a leash. The ultimate irony of Brenda's sentence, however, was the community service mandate attached to her future probation. Judge Peterson ordered that upon her release, Brenda would be required to perform 500 hours of manual labor for the County Parks Department, specifically maintaining the public beach access paths around Cedar Lake, the very public path she had refused to use. As the bailiff led Brenda away in handcuffs, this time wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of a floral swimsuit cover-up, she didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at Skylar or me. She just stared at the floor, a broken monarch exiled from her own neighborhood. The aftermath of the trial brought sweeping changes to Cedar Lake shores. The community held a massive town hall meeting to address the future of the HOA. After realizing the sheer amount of damage an unchecked board could do, the residents voted overwhelmingly to disband the Homeowners Association entirely. The roads were handed over to the county maintenance department. The public beach was transferred to the local parks authority, and the restrictive 200-page CCR document was legally nullified. We were no longer a managed community. We were just a neighborhood. People painted their mailboxes whatever color they wanted. They planted whatever native or non-native flowers they liked, and nobody ever received a fine for leaving a trash can out past 8 a.m. As for Skylar and me, we finally got the sanctuary we had been searching for. With the HOA dissolved and Brenda's house sold to a lovely, quiet retired couple from Milwaukee, the constant tension that had clouded our weekends evaporated. It is now a year later. I am sitting on the back deck of our cedar, apiary A-frame cabin, drinking my morning coffee. The mist is rolling off the lake, and the only sound is the haunting, beautiful call of the loons in the distance. I look down the sloping backyard. The hydrangeas Skylar planted are blooming brilliantly in shades of deep blue and purple. The stone path is clean and undisturbed. And at the bottom of the property line, right before the wooden dock, the wrought iron gate stands closed. The heavy-duty master lock is still there, wrapped securely in its thick steel chain. It's a little weathered now, showing the faint signs of a harsh Wisconsin winter, but it remains unbreakable. We don't really need it anymore. Nobody tries to cut through our yard these days, but we leave it there anyway. It serves as a quiet, metallic monument to boundaries, A reminder that sometimes the smallest act of standing your ground can topple an entire empire of entitlement. Skylar steps out onto the deck, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. She hands me a warm croissant, leaning against the wooden railing beside me. We watch the sunrise paint the water in streaks of pink and gold, breathing in the scent of pine and fresh water. We don't talk about Brenda anymore. We don't talk about court dates, or lawyers, or property easements. We just listen to the silence. It was a hell of a fight, but looking out over the peaceful water of Cedar Lake, I can confidently say it was worth every single penny we spent on that lock. Thank you so much for reading this crazy journey. If you enjoyed this story of an HOA tyrant finally getting the karma she deserved, please smash that like button, share this video with anyone who has ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life drama stories. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done if someone demanded access to your private yard.